Unlock Your Potential podcast, where we focus on creating positive, productive, and profitable workplaces. I am your host, Michael Sherlock. I am a leadership and sales expert, best known for being serious about business, despite what you may think by my appearance of often very colorful hair and sometimes crazy shoes. My guests bring a wealth of information that will support your career and your business, along with many pearls of wisdom to support balance in your personal and professional lives. Listen in as I have another amazing conversation with a guest who will certainly shock your potential.
And my guest today is Tim Spiker, and he is the author of The Only Leaders Worth Following, which that alone tells you, this is going to be something near and dear to my heart. And he's been passionately investigating leadership effectiveness for the past more than 2 decades. He and his organization, the Apereo, help people become, be, and stay leaders who are actually worth following. And he has worked with teams across the globe, creating unique and customized learning experiences and guiding long-term developmental journeys. And that's what leadership is really all about, is making sure you're constantly working on yourself. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining me today.
Michael, really excited to be here with you and with the folks that are listening.
Yeah, I have such a great audience, and they are constantly working on themselves. And a vast majority of my followers are leaders, a lot of them in retail sales. They've gone through a lot of fluctuations. And we know leadership is different today too, with so much happening remotely. So I know everybody's going to gain a lot. So I gave the highlights from your bio, but tell us a little bit about you, your business, and how you help people to shock their potential.
About 20 years ago, I was waiting tables, getting ready to start my graduate business studies, and I had a colleague, aka another server at the restaurant, who invited me to an open house for a marketing company. Now, Michael, if you are ever invited to an open house for a marketing company, or anybody listening, I encourage you to ask more questions than I did.
Does this have to do with like Cutco knives?
You're a fortune teller. You see where this is heading right away. Very good. Yeah. So what I was pretty sure of, I knew I was going to be focusing on marketing in my business studies. And so I was interested in that regard. I was also pretty sure there would be a free meal there. And that was very appealing at the time. So she had me. So I walked into the room. I took a seat in the middle of the room, which turns out to be an important part of the story. And they begin a little presentation, which turned out to be a recruiting meeting for a marketing company. Now, I'm not against MLMs. I know they have been a blessing to a lot of people, but I personally at the time had no interest in selling water purifiers to my family and friends. So I wasn't that excited about being there. But in the middle of that presentation, because I'm not going to make a scene. I'll just wait to the break and then I'll grab my sandwich and get out. In the middle of that initial presentation, they started talking about what does it mean to be an employee. And it was as if all evil of all time just entered the room. It was just, people were so disheartened at the idea of actually following somebody. And I just checked out. I didn't hear anything else. I mean, it became Charlie Brown's teacher to the rest of the presentation. I was just sitting there. Exactly that. Yep. Just thinking, it doesn't have to be that way. How come if somebody says, what is it like to follow so-and-so? How come the answer wouldn't be, it's the most incredible experience of my life. I can't believe how much I'm being stretched and grown. I can't believe the thing I'm pushing. I can't believe how I'm cared for. How come that's not the answer when somebody says, what is it like to follow somebody? So that night, I did leave with a break and grab my sandwich. I did do that. But I decided that night that I was going to start interviewing leaders that I had access to. And every time I would interview them, I would say the same thing at the end. Who else should I talk to? And that just led to a kind of huge anecdotal, qualitative leadership study, and eventually the leadership consultancy, getting involved in research. Then over the course of time, the last 20 years of my life have been dedicated and focused on the topic of leadership. So that's the story about how I got into this work.
That is so funny. And so my question is, did your friend who got you into that marketing presentation, did she go into that business?
No, she was already in the business. See, I didn't know that. She was waiting tables,
Oh,
but that was kind of like, trying to get the MLM thing to take off on the side. So she was already there and thought that maybe I would be interested, but she didn't know what that night would hold for me. I tell some people it's the greatest lie I've ever been told. It's led me on a journey that I love the work that I do. If we didn't have to worry about finances, there'd be very little about my vocation that I would change. So I'm very, very thankful that I got duped into being in that meeting that night.
and I can see that happening too, because I actually have been involved in MLMs a couple times, and not because of the business, but because of whatever the product was. And one was a health supplement that I got hooked on myself, and had such like amazing just responses to it that people are like, what's happening? I'm like, well, I started drinking this stuff. They're like, how do I get it? I'm like, here, order it from here. You want to sell it too? Okay, cool. And my whole goal was that if I had enough people that were excited about it, then I didn't have to pay for my stuff. So,
That's a good goal to have. Yeah.
exactly.
Covers the cost.
Exactly. But yeah, I didn't ever see it as my long-term objective because it was too much work.
It is. Yep. It is challenging industry to be in overall.
Yes. So when you worked with, one of the things that really struck my interest with your bio is that you create these unique experiences, and you're taking people on, developmental journeys. What do you do with them?
Well, to tell that story, another story to lead into it. So
Excellent.
why is the journey, as it were, why is it even necessary?
Mhm.
When I was at a small boutique consulting firm, we had data from a number of different assessments as we would take our leaders up to the west side of Pikes Peak and do some different leadership activities. And they were regularly asking us, what is the magic combination of personality and natural ability that leads to or gives a better chance of a more effective leader? And so we had the data, and my colleague, Vanessa Kiley, she took all the numbers. She was our number cruncher, and she put it through the SPSS software to look for correlations so that we could come back with an answer. So she put the software through its paces, and she found nothing. There was no correlation. There was no.
I'm going to say, yes, I'm waiting. I love how you just
Yeah.
put that in the suspense, and then it's like the cliff is right there. And then we're
Yeah.
like, ah.
We were expecting her to find correlations between personality styles, natural abilities, and leadership performance, but she didn't find any. And I remember that night I turned to leave her office, and I thought, well, at least we have an answer. We get this question a lot from our clients, so we can say, hey, there's no special formula. But she stopped me. She said, but the software did find a correlation in a place that we weren't with. And I'm like, turned around. I'm like, okay.
What?
Tell me what we found. We had 8 aspects of leadership that we were measuring on our Leadership 360. And what the software found is that just 2 of the 8 areas were driving almost 70% of the variability on the assessment. And if you think about a pizza, if you split it into 8 equal pieces, any 2 pieces should be worth 25%. So we were just under 70%. And then years later, with 10 times the data points, she ran the analysis again and it had gone up to 77%. And so what that told us, it took us a while we were like stepping back from it. Sometimes things are really obvious. You don't see them for a while. We knew it was a big deal, but we weren't quite sure what to make of it. And as the years passed, literally it was 3 years later, I'd actually left the firm and I was sitting in my office one day thinking about this data and this research. And it's just like it landed on top of my head. I'm looking at those 8 areas, and there are those two that are creating 3/4 of the ability. They're more important than the other 6 combined by 3 times. And then I just realized when you look at those two aspects were about who the leader is as a person, as opposed to what they do as leaders. And so over time, we've just morphed that into a very simple phrase, which is 3/4 of your effectiveness as a leader comes from who you are, what you do. And so getting back to the original question, why a journey? We take people on and this is a metaphorical journey. This is not an actual trip, but we walk with people for an extended period of time around the leadership development exercise. And we call it a journey because it takes time for us to grow and develop as people. That's, I mean, look at a big strong oak tree, which is the analogy that we use with our clients. How long did it take that tree to become what it is? It took a lifetime. And so we take a really dive in with people. One of the things that we're keen on doing as much as possible is it's great for people to have education. It's great for them to understand concepts. But what we are more interested in as an organization is helping them become. And that takes a really concerted effort. And so we go on this journey with our clients to help them become really well-developed who's, because that's going to help them be more effective leaders.
Yeah, and I think that's really, it's very telling. And it's one of the things that, I work in leadership as well. And, I'm always talking to people about, the mirror and reflecting on yourself. And that reflection is going to change over time. So who you are as a leader today may have a lot of similarities to who you were 10 years ago or where you'll be 10 years from now, but there are going to be a lot of changes. So the ability to continually reflect means you're watching and you understand them, but that you're also going to say, hey, wait, I'm starting to lose a little something here, or there's something more I can gain now, and should prompt you to continue to work on yourself.
Yeah. Well, that idea of we're singing off the same sheet of paper as we think about the idea of what does it mean to look in the mirror. It's a tough thing to do, but it's so important to do all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you work with people, I know I've had some great success stories, which I really love, but when you work with people and you see them take that journey and really evolve and become, to your point, who they want to be as a leader, what kind of, results do you get from that? What kind of impact do they have then?
Yeah, there's anecdotal stories and then there's some data. So I'll tell you one from each camp. Which do you want first? The anecdotal story or the data?
Data.
You get to pick.
I don't know, data, just because then we get the story afterward.
Okay.
Then I have to have a little delayed gratification.
Okay, very good. There was an organization that works in manufacturing space that was just to give a little scope, it's about $1 billion organization. So they have depending on your audience perspective, maybe that's huge, maybe that's small, but that was the scope we were working with in an international organization. And when we first started working with them around this topic, I was very fortunate because they started working with McKinsey at the exact same time. And so McKinsey has something called the Organizational Health Index. And it's a worldwide on, and McKinsey talks a lot about kind of how health in organizations drives performance. And so they took their first assessment right when we were starting with them. And unfortunately, they tested out in the bottom quartile. And so you can imagine that they were not very excited about that. But as we worked with them over the next 5 years about developing the who of their leaders, we're talking about, in some cases, very personal things. We're talking about what does it mean to be inwardly sound and others focused? And we break that down into a number of components. So it's kind of like, the classic story of eating an elephant. You can only do it a bite at a time. So we take those things and break them. But over the course of 5 years, working with their senior executive team, the next layer down in the organization, and doing some work with their frontline leaders as well, they're being retested every 2 years by McKinsey. Now, as they worked on who they are, fast forward 5 years later, they test again and they land in the top quartile of Organizational Health Index with McKinsey. They made a 22% jump during those 5 years. Now, I am not saying that them working with us was solely, they were doing many things during that time to improve that. But their seniors to a person came to us and said, focusing on becoming a better who has been a meaningful part of this journey for us and has made a big contribution. The bigger part of that story is not what we did. It's the fact that they were willing to do the work on very personal stuff. Not many organizations are willing to have the real conversation that you need to have. So if I'm saying to somebody, hey, I know you don't want to, but your empathy meter is broken. I know it's a hard message to hear, but we got to talk about this because it's disconnecting you from your people, and they're not that excited about working for you. Who's going to be willing to be in that conversation? And so to find an entire organization with leadership who's saying, we want to be having that conversation throughout the organization. And then we want to do the hard work in those areas as well. And so all credit to them to being willing to dig in and talk about things, especially in the for-profit space where most organizations are not willing to have those conversations. So credit to them, but that's some data to kind of show what happens, what can happen if you're willing to dig in and work on who. So that's the data. That's a data story. Now here's the anecdote. Wow. In another division of that company, there was a senior leader in the top executive team who came to us about 18 months into this work. And he was just a very simple story, but I think it really makes the case. And he had worked hard. Getting back to where does the credit go? He had been willing to do the work, to have the personal conversations with himself, with us, with others, doing that consistently over 18 months. He had somebody come to him after 18 months and said, 18 months ago, I was ready to leave this organization, and it was because of you. Oh. Now I'm staying here, and it's because of you.
Oh.
And so, I think about stories like this, and the number one question we get is we don't get a lot of pushback on whether this data is real. Is who, not what, a real phenomenon? Where we do get questions is it even possible for a grown adult to grow and develop in who they are, at the core of who they are? Is that even possible? And I'll say it's pretty unlikely that somebody's going to move 180 degrees. But Can we get better even later in life? Some people think it's not possible. Actually, research shows that it is very possible. It's just hard work. And so
I think you've got to make the mental shift to do it. You've got to say, I'm willing to do it.
Yeah, I think about both of these stories, both this anecdotal story and the data story, because almost all of the leaders, in fact, I would say, if I'm estimating correctly, I'd say every single leader that we worked with in this organization, there might have been 5% that were under the age of 30. Most of them were north of 40 and some north of 50. And so if you look at the number movement or even that story example, you have to conclude, it is possible for people to grow and develop in who they are. They just have to be willing to do the work.
Right. And I always say to people, just because something may not seem probable to you doesn't mean it's not possible.
Yeah.
But if you let the probable stop you from moving forward, it will never be possible.
Well, that's true. That's true. There is an element. There's an element of trust and work that go into it in order to make it possible. But what we know for sure is if you don't try, we know that it won't work out. We know that for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's so true. And I think of a lot of times when I'm talking to leaders who are wanting their team to change. And so, I need these people to do better. I need them to, come with more attitude, or, I need them to keep learning, whatever I need them to do. Mm-hmm. And I love turning it back on them and saying, what are you doing? What are you doing to develop yourself? What do you need to change? And so I always ask them, what do those people say about you when you're not in the room? What words should they use to describe you? And what words, and if you don't know, well, then you're really out of touch because you're missing something, but you probably do know what they're saying. Mm-hmm. Now, the question is, are those the words you want used about you? And if you don't know at all, you have a lot more work to do.
Yeah. Well, I love that you asked that question. I was in a conversation yesterday with somebody who works in fractional HR in terms of they're working with mid to small size businesses and helping them have those services. She's talking about her clients who have a significant turnover issue. And look, these people, they keep leaving. And finally, she used a great analogy. She said, the person who is constantly, wants to be in a relationship, but is constantly dating and then moving on to the next person. It doesn't work out. And everybody's nodding their head saying, yeah, we know that person. She's like, you're that person. you're the people are leaving the organization. You make that personally a little bit more. Instead of blaming them for leaving, we got to start to ask the question, what is the culture and leadership that they continuously leave? And I love that she put it to them. And I think here's the mirror, guys. If everybody's leaving all the time, we should probably stop blaming everybody else. So just just to your point, like, what are you doing? What are they saying about you? What are you doing? It's not just what everybody else should be doing. What are you willing to do?
Yeah. What's the common denominator in that story?
Right. Who's always involved in all of those, in all of that situations, or high turnover or bad relationships? Yeah.
I have a funny little, tidbit about a company that I worked for once upon a time, long ago. And it was before, you really knew how to research companies. There wasn't the Glassdoor then, and there, weren't a lot of Yelp reviews or whatever. People weren't writing on Indeed how they felt about a company. And so it was interesting that this company had a lot of turnover. And I had no idea until I got there. And had I known, would that have changed my mind? I don't know. I mean, there were a lot of great benefits for me working at that company. Not all positive, but, not all negative. But it was interesting to me after I left, I think I'd been gone for several years, and I saw something online. I hadn't looked for them. It was just something that popped up, and it talked about their, not attrition rate, but their, whatever, when people stay, like the average months per stay of a person's employment there. And it was 7 months.
Oh,
and I went, wow.
Wow.
That's shocking to me.
That's speaking of shocking. Yeah, that's shocking. Yeah, wow. That is not.
And it made me wonder, I mean, that I think there are a lot of businesses that don't stop and think about that. And we all know that people leave situations not because of really the company, but because of leadership or, the environment that comes from leadership. And, the ability for any of us as leaders to kind of peel back the curtain on ourselves and ask ourselves. I mean, even if we're, you can be a great leader, but if you're also surrounded next door, or the person who works for you or whatever, with somebody who's creating a different kind of environment, it takes a lot of guts to try and change those situations too. And not everybody is not everybody's up to that challenge.
Yeah. Good point. Absolutely.
Yeah. So do you have any good tips on how people can kind of maintain some mental flexibility this year?
I would say that, and it goes a little bit deep, but hey, your audience can handle this. So
They can handle it.
Yeah, let's go to a place that's going to require a little bit more of them than maybe just a little bitty tweak, maybe a little bit more, and that is humility. I would just say we make plans, and it's great that we make plans. We should make plans. I mean, think about a budget or your calendar. I think what I can say for sure, whether it's in my business, my personal, what the budget tells me, it almost never gets followed to the T, but it tells me the adjustments I have to make when it doesn't get followed to a T. So I'm okay. I took some from here. I'm going to have to find that somewhere else. So it is very important to have plans because it helps us understand where we are. But I think, especially in the business space, organizational life, even if it's a not-for-profit, I think we have to be careful about how wedded we become to those plans from an ego standpoint. Yes, it's important that we have some stick-to-itiveness and we don't crumble at the sign of a challenge, but there is the other side to it where we have to be humble enough to say, maybe I didn't make the best plan, or maybe my plan's not going to work out in this environment. Maybe we need to make adjustment. Maybe even, I'll just throw this out here as a possibility, Michael, maybe somebody else has a better idea right now than I do. I know it's a shocking idea to consider, but maybe somebody else's idea is the one we need to go with now. But regardless, if we enter into it with a spirit of humility that says from the get-go, I'm going to do the best I can. I am going to make plans, but I might not have this all figured out. And I need to be open to that. And I need to be open to other people. I need to make sure that my ego doesn't lead myself or others into worse situations because I'm unwilling to look at what's going on around me or listen to other people. So really committing to a spirit and attitude of humility, I think, is a great way to make yourself flexible to handle whatever might get thrown your way.
I don't know if that was too deep, but that was very wise. And if I was in my normal home office, I would refer to who I usually have in the back as Yoga Dog, my little statue, and say, Yoga Dog agrees. And I love how you said healthy flexibility, because it's that's part of the process, is that reflection. And I like the idea of letting go of your ego a little bit. I have to do it every once in a while myself. So it's a good reminder I'm like, have you bbeen listening to my brain?
I'm not going to bring all the people into the interview who could tell you about mine. So, they're out there. We'll just say they're out there.
All right, we'll just leave it at that. Tim, this has been fabulous. I know we'll have all of your contact information on our show notes, but just in case somebody wants to type in right now and find you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure. Best way to find us is at onlyleaders.com, theonlyleaders.com. And if you go there, we're getting ready to put a discussion and study guide out to go along with the book. So that'll be something that we offer for free to people who sign up for our email list.
Excellent. That sounds wonderful. We'll put that in all the show notes as well.
Great.
So before we go, do you have any last words of wisdom or pearls of advice for my listeners and viewers?
I'm going to double down on something you said earlier, and it's come up a couple of times, so we can hold hands and agree on this one. It is important to look in the mirror. I mean, it's hard. It's for some of us, it's scary if we're not practiced at that. When what hits the fan, we usually have the inclination to look out. And what's the problem over there? What's the problem with you? And if that's not our first thought, it's our most consistent thought. Somewhere between first and most, we're looking out. And I just find that the best leaders in the world are the ones whose first reaction is to say, what could I have done differently? Again, get back to I can humble myself a little bit, understand that I've made a contribution to the challenges or problems, and now I can do something about it. So the last word, if you will, I would say is have the courage to look in the mirror and own what you see, both good and not so good.
I love it. Tim, thank you so much. Great words of advice, without a doubt. And I am so glad we are connected. Thank you for being my guest today.
Michael, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on another episode of the Shock Your Potential podcast. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and like us today.